Hello, and welcome to my Shadows Over Innistrad preview. The format is going to come out in, I think, another week or so, and I wanted to do a quick little preview about it, talking about what it is, sort of some of the mechanics from it, just to sort of get prepared a little for it. I'm in the midst of drafting Strixhaven a lot right now because Phyrexia Obi-Wan made me sick of the game a little bit, maybe, and then I started playing Strixhaven and was like, oh, I remember why this game is enjoyable at times, so I've been sort of diving into that, but I've looked a little bit ahead to the Shadows Over Innistrad preview, which I don't know how much overlap there is with Strixhaven, whether Strixhaven will be around or not. I think it's probably going to leave, and then this is going to come out and replace it, and this looks like it's going to be interesting. I don't know if it's going to be as good as Strixhaven, but it certainly looks interesting, and I wanted to talk more about what it is today. Notably, the format is a combination of these two old boomer Magic formats, Eldritch Moon and Shadows Over Innistrad. It's called Shadows Over Innistrad Remastered, so I would hope that Shadows Over Innistrad's in it. Originally, I thought it was just going to be Shadows Over Innistrad, but that's not what it is. The format is actually a mix of the cards from the two sets I just mentioned, and they'll be in packs together. I think it's probably going to be similar to the double feature, like Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow sort of situation. They're sort of doing the same thing with older Innistrad sets that they did with the new Innistrad sets. Kind of a cool thing. I do not know if there's going to be two rares. I do not think there's going to be two rares. Instead of a second rare, I assume that this is replacing a second rare, is the rotating card sheet. So if you've played a Brothers War or a Strixhaven, and I think the reason they just brought Strixhaven back partially is to have people remember about the spell sheet, the mystical archive. It's going to be like that. There's going to be a set of cards that appear in some packs. I don't think it's all the packs. It was all the packs for Bro. I don't know if it was all the packs. I forget if it was all the packs or only some of the packs in Brothers War. In Strixhaven, it is also not all of the packs. No, it is all of the packs. I'm sorry, I'm being stupid. It is all of the packs. So every single pack has a card from the archive. And in this case, it's a archive of cards that will change every week. So every week, I think it's going to be out for 4 weeks. There's 4 different sets of cards that are in this extra slot, and that'll change things up a little bit. I don't think it will have like an enormous impact on the format in terms of like overall stuff that's happening, like whether or not like it will change from week to week. I think it will change. Like things will change a little bit, but I think that broadly the format is going to be fairly similar most of the time. They've released what the cards are for the retro sheet, so you can go look them up if you like. I don't know how much that's going to help you, considering that they're only out for a week anyways, so like even if you memorize all of them, you have to like remember that it's this week's cards and not the next week's cards. I don't think there's any overlap, so you kind of gotta use the information while it actually matters. And that's kind of it. I think that's sort of the overview of how things are going to be constructed. And I sort of wanted to talk a little bit more about like old sets in general and like what some of the set mechanics and stuff like that, just as a quick little preview. I think the most important thing to note about these sets is that there are not any gold uncommons. And any is kind of a strong word. There are some uncommons that are multicolored in Eldritch Moon, but I only saw 3 of them. Now that just could be my cursory glance stuff where like I didn't actually like look hard enough and didn't find all of them, but I'm pretty sure there's only like 3 of them. That's what it looked like. I could just be really stupid. Either way, in Shadows Over Innistrad, there are not gold uncommons. And so that will dilute the pool of gold uncommons, even if there are a bunch from Eldritch Moon that I didn't see for some reason. It would be weird. It seemed weird to me that they would only print like 3 of them, but maybe that was just how things were. It also might be that there were some like in a different spot because there were transform cards, and there's a bunch of transformed cards that are displayed in different areas, and I don't know, whatever. Anyways, sort of broadly what this means is decks are going to be less focused, right? You're kind of going to be in this more generic, like, play the good cards of your colors, more so than you're going to be saying, all right, well, I want my deck to do this one thing. And obviously, there's still going to be the synergies and whatever, but I think at the time, like, Magic design was a little bit different than it is today. They were designing for limited, but as we'll get to in a little bit, it is still not like quite the same in terms of what cards were like. My broad understanding of drafting in this era of Magic is that you sort of were trying to stay in one color as long as possible and sort of wait to see what's open. It's kind of generally an approach that many people have talked about and is still applicable today, but has become less relevant over time as there are fewer cards that are truly unplayable. In these sets, there are cards that are truly unplayable, and you do not want to be playing in your deck. And don't do anything. And yeah, so this is interesting. So there are cards, as you can see here, there's the Olivia's Bloodsworn, which is sort of like a pseudo gold uncommon. It's not really, though. Like, I think you're going to be happy with a 2-mana, 2/1 flyer that can't block. That was literally just a card that was printed, and it wasn't good, but like it wasn't like completely unplayable. This card is going to be much better than that card because the other cards around it are going to be worse. Like a 2-mana, 2/1 flyer is a lot better, now, a lot worse now than it used to be. So I think this card actually is going to be somewhat decent and does enable your vampire stuff. Although I think even the ability is not even like that relevant. But yeah, so as I mentioned, there are a lot of bad cards in the set. You don't really see vanilla creatures anymore. You just don't see many of them. They don't really print them because they know they're pretty uninteresting. And aside from newer players, there's really not any use for them because they're never going to be good and constructed unless their stats are extremely over pushed. So, and then that's not interesting either. Like, there's really no interesting way to make vanilla creatures playable or fun to play with. Again, they're good for learning the game, but I think that Magic caters more towards its established audience these days for the most part than trying to recruit new people. There's stuff like Jumpstart and other things that help that. They have their other ways of approaching that than draft, which is not what they are focusing on. Yes, there are many commons like this. We have the Devilthorn Fox here. The Devilthorn Fox actually, I think, is not going to be that bad. Like, it's not the worst of the vanilla creatures, which is sort of why I've picked it, because it is just a 2-mana 3/1, but I think a 2-mana 3/1 is not like the absolute worst thing in the world. Like this one, I think you will this may make your deck and it probably isn't a complete embarrassment sometimes. It has no types that matter either. But like there's some other vanilla creatures that are truly just like there's a red 2-mana 2/2 that just is a 2-mana 2/2. Like this is better than that, but I don't think it's like that much better. There really aren't a lot of value for this, and this is sort of highlights that there is this huge disparity between the good cards and the bad cards. An unplayable card in Modern Limited is much better than an unplayable card in this format. So you will see Devilthorn Fox and be like, all right, well, I'm gonna have to play this card as like my 23rd card. And like today you'd be like, well, this 2-mana 3/1 has text on it that doesn't really matter in my deck, and that's my 23rd card. But like at least it has other text on it that sometimes matters occasionally, you know. So it is very important to figure out what is open, right? Because you need to have enough really, really impactful cards that matter in the game. So let's get into the mechanics. I think the most important and significant mechanic is Investigate. Now, I am excited to be proven wrong on this somehow, but basically, my thesis for why I think Investigate is going to be the most important mechanic is that the cards are generally worse, and so it will be more difficult to end the game with fewer cards. As a result of this, having more cards means you're more likely to win the game. Again, in modern sets, you often can end the game much earlier than you'll be able to end the game in this set, because the cards A have better stats and better abilities than they did 10 years ago. And like, yeah, they print better, cheaper cards these days than they did a long time ago. So games lasted longer, and games are going to last a long time. I think games are going to last maybe not as long as any format on Arena, but I certainly think for a very, very long time. I'm excited to see the data on this set. I think it is likely to be an outlier. We will get probably a good indicator of how fast limited formats used to be in comparison to new sets, which I think is going to be fascinating, to be honest with you. Now, it's not going to be perfect again because the sheet makes things a little different, so there's likely to be slightly more powerful cards. Decks are likely to be slightly more powerful on average because they're going to have 3 probably better cards on them than what they would normally have had. But that aside, I think it's going to be fairly similar to what the experience was like. And it is, and again, the sets are combined, so there's going to be less synergy generally. So like theoretically, games should go longer. There's another mechanic, Escalate. It's a kicker adjacent mechanic where you can pay more mana, or in Collective Brutality's case, you can discard a card, and you get to choose different modes. These type of mechanics are always really good and limited. They are interesting and provide interesting gameplay generally, so they make it more fun to play. And I think a lot of the cards will be good because, in older formats, you have more time and less things to spend your mana on. So you should have, theoretically, more ways to use the card than just like having to use it for its cheapest cost. So, yeah, it's a cool mechanic. I'm excited to see how it plays out in this format. That's about it. More kicker. Everybody likes kicker. Next is Madness. So if you have not played with Madness before, I actually have not played with Madness before. Basically, how Madness works is when you discard a card, you have an opportunity to cast that card. Or you can just not do that and put it in the graveyard. So basically what this does is it is a form of card advantage in a way, right? Because generally when you're discarding a card, you're gaining cards in some other way. Or like instead of going down a card, you're going down some mana. And this is pretty cool. So it's a cool mechanic. It allows you to sort of make use of discard synergies in ways that you often can't. This is a mechanic that I'm hoping they bring back soon-ish, because it is interesting. Like, it is an interesting mechanic that you don't really get to see a ton of. You don't really get to like interact with all the time. It gives you an incentive to discard stuff. But yeah, again, like generally, like you really need to be able to enable it. Like, or you want to have a card like Fiery Temper where like if you just cast the front side of this card, it's not the end of Planet Earth. Now, this card is not a 3-mana deal 3, especially at the time, was bad. But turning any card into Lightning Bolt when you discard it is really strong. Spencer, it doesn't hit Planeswalkers. Very true. It does not. There are Planeswalkers in the set. There's a number of them. I'm not going to talk about them specifically. They're all expensive. So they're all going to be hard to... You're not going to play around them or whatever explicitly. But yes, it's going to be annoying when your removal doesn't hit Planeswalkers. Like today, all removal pretty much hits Planeswalkers. That was not the case in 2013. Some of your removal is not going to hit Planeswalkers. Oh, sorry. And a mechanic that kind of goes along with Madness is Delirium, although they play against each other, right? When you exile a Madness card and you don't put it in your graveyard, with Delirium, you want stuff in your graveyard, specifically 4 or more card types. I think it's always 4 or more card types. I'm not 100% sure. I think at least in this set. They've used it in multiple sets, I believe, in the past, so I think it may or may not have been different numbers. I think it's always 4, though. Basically, it's about card types. So generally, the 4 types of cards you're going to be able to get into your graveyard in Limited are lands, instants, sorceries, and creatures. are going to be the easiest 4 to get into your graveyard. Now, lands are mostly going to be through mill. I don't believe there's an Evolving Wilds variant in the set. So mostly you're going to have to mill. You could also maybe get an enchantment or an artifact in your graveyard as well. So that's sort of how you're enabling Delirium. And generally it is a mill-enabled sub-theme. It does clash with Madness, right? So like you're clashing with Madness in the sense that you kind of can't really do both in the same deck, really. Like you either want your cards to go to the graveyard or you don't. And so you sort of don't want to be doing the same thing. This looks difficult to enable in Limited. Again, I haven't played the set, but it does look like it's going to be pretty difficult to enable this type of effect because there's not a ton of artifacts you want to play. The Eldrazi, notably, are not artifacts. They're just colorless. So that you don't get any help there either. So it is kind of a tough situation. So I'm pessimistic on Delirium's overall outlook. Now, obviously, this card on the right is not especially fantastic anyways. But, yeah. So just kind of be advised on Delirium. Next is Skulk. Weird mechanic, one of the weirdest ever. The creatures can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. There really isn't any synergy around this at all. I don't think that it matters really. I think it will matter sometimes, but don't really think this is especially worth devoting a ton of brain power to learning about. I would basically read it as like this card is 1 to 5% better than you think it is. Like if you just look at the vanilla creature, it's like 5% better than the vanilla version of the creature. Now maybe that's a little bit too low, but again, there's not really any cards that are like if your creature has Skulk, it gets this. There's not a ton of those from what I can tell. It looks mostly like it's just kind of like, well, if you have a Skulk, sometimes you get to attack. And then your opponent hits you back with something that's ostensibly bigger. So I don't know. Is Unblockable even that good? It's fine. It's decent. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see how this stuff being unblockable matters or doesn't matter or whatever. So we'll wait and see. Next is Emerge. So Emerge lets you cast your Eldrazi large guys for cheaper costs. This is sort of like Bros. What's it called? It was so bad, I forgot the name of the mechanic. Prototype. So it's kind of like Prototype in the sense that it allows you to reduce the casting cost of your big stuff to make it cheaper. But in this case, you have to reduce it by sacrificing one of your creatures. Yeah, generally you don't want to be sacrificing your creatures, and you also can't basically sacrifice a token to make it any cheaper. That doesn't help you. Not that there are a ton of tokens running around anyways, but generally I think what you're going to want to do is just sacrifice a worthless 2-drop, of which there are many in this format, and get one of these things out earlier. If you get this Wretched Gryff out on turn 4, by sacrificing your 2-drop, you get a 3/4 flyer for 4, and you get your card back after off of sacrificing your 2-drop that probably isn't very good. Yeah, I mean, I could see that being decent. I could see that being a decent thing to be doing, especially in this format. Wretched Gryff to me seems like a decent card anyways. It's 7 mana, 3/4 fire, ETB's draw card. I don't know, drawing cards is great, even in the late stage, especially in the late stages of the game. And if you have something on board that isn't doing anything or is just kind of hanging out, your opponent has 2 1/1s and you have that 3/1 we had talked about earlier. You sacrifice that and then you get to play this for 4 mana and then you're happy, right? If you just sacrifice your 4-drop on 4 and play this as a 4 mana 3/4 flyer draw card, that's really strong. Now again, you're kind of going all in, but I don't know. I think it's fine-ish to do that. So I have some. I think this mechanic is interesting. That's all I'll say about it. I do generally think it's going to be better than the Bro mechanic, just because the format should be slower. But maybe it won't. Maybe it'll be fast. can't really imagine a world in which the format is fast, or for actually all be one fast at all in any way, but it could happen. And so the last mechanic I wanted to talk about is Werewolves and other transform cards. So there's many cards in the set that just transform, like you just pay mana and then they flip over, or whatever. Or something happens and they flip over. But there are also Werewolves, and these are old Werewolves. These are very different from the Midnight Hunt Werewolves, where if you or your opponent casts a spell, they don't flip. So you basically don't really have control over flipping these, and you should almost never be trying to flip them unless your opponent is tapped out, essentially. Because it's not going to happen. So, and by not going to happen, I mean like it is going to happen sometimes, but it's not going to happen enough of the time that you're going to be happy about like being like, oh, well, I pass on turn 6, and like I passed 6 mana, and my opponent spent like 2 mana and just like drew a card or something, and then I didn't get to flip my Werewolves, and now I'm sad forever, and my Werewolves are very small. So be on the lookout for that. The cards themselves, though, are probably going to perform similar, like probably like better than a Midnight Hunt, maybe not better than Vow. In Vow, they were actually pretty good. But in Midnight Hunt, there was just so much hate that was just randomly around. There's not nearly as much of that in this set, so there shouldn't be as much random stuff that just absolutely hates on Werewolves. So you should be able to play the Werewolves, and they're not just going to die to random stuff that says, all right, if it's a werewolf, kill it. So that's good to be advised of. And sort of like overall, just like my overall thoughts are that this is going to take us back to the Bread era of Magic. So one thing you'll notice when you look at the set's stuff is that the removal is pretty much the same in terms of its strength as it is today, but every single creature is worse. So that means that your removal is going to be able to trade up more often with your opponent's stuff. So if you want to like remove your opponent's 4-drop, it's probably only going to cost you 3 mana. Whereas today it would probably cost you 4 mana, generally, right? So like the removal is about the same, but the creatures are all non-power corrupt at all, so they are smaller, and so you're going to get value there. You're going to have the mana advantage when you remove something, which is not true anymore because generally, removal is generally worse now than it was a long time ago because you didn't get that tempo advantage. Back in the day, removal used to almost guarantee a tempo advantage. These days, that's not really true anymore, and so without that, you're playing a more reactive game and all that stuff. But yes, generally this means that the games, and as I've talked about for a long portion of this sort of preview, is the games are probably going to be slower, right? Like you're removing your opponent's stuff, and they're removing your stuff because the removal's the best cards. The games are going to take longer. Creatures are also weaker. Creatures being weaker means that it takes longer for them to kill your opponent. Sometimes normally your 2-drop is a whatever turn clock, and in this format it's one more turn that it would take than the average set these days. So basically, that means that your higher impact cards, your bombs, are more likely to have even higher impact because the rest of the stuff just doesn't matter as much. And it means that bombs need to be removed more. And you can't just race bombs really as much. Your opponent is going to get to 5 mana every game if they want, pretty much in this format. There's almost no way to stop your opponent from getting to 5 mana. In Modern Limited, where it's well, I had a 5-drop bomb, but I couldn't cast it because my opponent just went 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, and killed me. That's not going to happen. It's never going to happen in this format. You're never going to get curved out on 1, 2, 3 and just die. Now, you can get curved out on 1, 2, 3, but if you, in Modern Limited, if you remove their 3-drop, the 1-drop and 2-drop can sometimes just carry the rest of the way. If you remove their 3-drop, 1 and 2-drops aren't doing anything. They're doing nothing. They're just sitting there. They're just existing. So, yeah, those are my thoughts, early thoughts on the format. Excited to be proven wrong when inevitably it's really fast again, and then I go cry that Strixhaven isn't up anymore. Hopefully I didn't just spout absolute nonsense for no reason, and this is actually correct. It looked right when I looked stuff up, but I don't know. I've done stupid things before. I've said dumb things. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed watching this, and hopefully it prepared you in some way for the upcoming Shadows Remastered format stuff. I don't know. See you.